This is the wonderful brainchild of Baroness Nicholson, who is here in the front row, who has been engaged with this issue that we're discussing now for over 2 years and bringing it to the attention of... Thank you. I might even get started while you're going, because we are running a little bit late, and I tell you what, it's such a great event to all be together here tonight that I think we need to get cracking. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight is brought to you by Children and Women First. This is the wonderful brainchild of Baroness Nicholson, who's here in the front row, who has been engaged with this issue that we're discussing now for over 2 years and bringing it to the attention of her colleagues in Parliament. My name is Angela Richardson. I'm the Member of Parliament for Guildford, for those of you who don't know me. And I think this is the most important fringe in the Conservative Party conference, but not just the Conservative Party conference, every single political party's conference that we've had in this season, because this is the place tonight where we can actually have free speech and free debate, which I think we all welcome. So on the note of free speech, I'm going to start with 2 confessions. The first one is that I'm a social liberal. Now, that's probably not surprising, given that I'm the Member of Parliament for Guildford. But had government last year not put a pause on the legislation that would have made it easier to self-ID, I would have voted it through. And I probably would have voted it through. I would have listened to the people in my inbox, but you'd be surprised who writes to me and what side people fall on in these sorts of debates. But I would have voted it through. Thank goodness the government took a pause and took a moment. And actually, it's been more than a moment. It's about a year now. And it's just as well, given how topical this debate is at the moment. And my second confession is that I didn't come into this job as a feminist. Probably an old-fashioned feminist. I was born in the 70s, and that generation had done quite a lot of the hard yards. So I grew up as a girl who thought I could do anything and I could be anything. I think I was also the sort of girl who gave off the vibes to the chaps, don't mess with me. And it worked, and it still does work. And hallelujah. Except, of course, so my husband's sitting in the back row and he's pulling faces. But the other reason is I'm a mother of 3 children. I have a neurotypical daughter, I have an autistic son, and then I have a son who's got a great character and he's dyspraxic and all over the place. But I always thought I was going to have to fight a lot harder for my son to get good life chances than I ever thought I was going to have to for my daughter. But anybody who comes into this job or works for a Member of Parliament and meets people regularly in surgeries would never stay not a feminist for very long. There is so much more to be done for women, and I think it's important just to acknowledge that there's such a gap in things, and if we don't speak up for women now, when are we ever going to speak up? And as a woman coming into this job, it's such a privilege to be able to do that. So now is the time to speak, because many are still silent. And I don't know if you have been watching the debate on Twitter, but there aren't many people who are willing to put their head above the parapet on this. I think we've watched on, and many of us are fearful. We don't want to be monstered on Twitter. We don't want the pylons. We've watched what's happened to women who have stood up on this issue. And we have been scared, but many of us now are starting to speak out. And many have been speaking out about this for a long time. Jackie Doyle-Price, Member of Parliament, for Thurrock and what, Jackie? Thurrock and... Just Thurrock. Oh, because it's always something and something. Jackie's been speaking up about this for a long time. And it's fantastic to have a colleague like Jackie who's actually got a huge amount of courage. So we must not be silent. There's too much at stake. I have got colleagues asking me to be quiet and asking me the very words that they use as please stop the hurt. And as women, we are socially conditioned to try and ease hurt, to wrap our arms around people, to be peacemakers, to mend things. And the last thing I want to do is hurt anyone. But I can't do that if women are being hurt at the same time. And the public are with us. when we want to protect access to single-sex spaces, when we want to protect children from making life-changing, life-altering decisions with their bodies that are irreversible. And we want to stop the nonsensical, just the ridiculous notion that us as women should have the language that we use about us erased. I don't want that. I don't think any of us want that. I don't want to be called a chest feeder. I don't want to be called a cervix haver. So Becky Ryan very kindly gave me some info. It's on my WhatsApp. I'm reading this. Polling carried out this week by Women for Women UK shows that Conservative voters were particularly concerned about protecting women and children. There was almost 60% net disapproval amongst Conservative voters for biological males in women's sports, and over 80% were opposed to children as young as 4 being able to change their name and gender at school without parental consent under new Scottish government guidelines. And 37% of those voting Conservative in 2019 said their vote would be influenced by the party's stance on this issue, suggesting they would change their vote away from the government if the government went further and faster on policies such as self-ID. So it was the right decision from number 10 to put a pause on that legislation. But in order to have this free speech tonight, we need to get on to the actual stars of the show. We have the wonderful author Helen Joyce, who has written Trans When Ideology Meets Reality. It's a groundbreaking book. I'm about halfway through. It is quite chunky. It is quite specific and detailed, but it is so worth reading. And she is going to read to us from that book tonight. And then we're going to be followed by a Q&A with Julia Hartley-Brewer, who needs no introduction, wonderful radio talk show host from Talk Radio, but also a truth teller. I think we will all agree with that. And we need more women telling the truth. So without further ado, could you please put your hands together for our wonderful panel tonight? Thank you very much.
So the way this works is I'm going to spend about 15 minutes, and I'm not going to just read 15 minutes worth of the book because I think that would be tedious. I've just finished recording the audiobook and I've had enough of listening to my own words read back in my own voice. What I'm going to do is just go through the introduction, which lays out what I did and why I did it. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about what the experience has been like about writing a controversial book that says that male and female are real things. I'm going to talk a little bit then about how deeply angry, actually livid, I am that the people whose job it is to do this sort of thing aren't doing it. And I'm going to name names. Right. This book starts with a very important sentence, which is that this is a book about an idea. And it's an idea that seems simple but has far-reaching consequences. The idea is that people should count as men or women according to how they feel and what they declare instead of their biology. This is the idea called gender self-identification. A little bit later on, I say, this is not a book about trans people. My editor and my agent kept saying, are you going to profile happy trans people and sad trans people, people it worked for and people who detransitioned? And I said, I'm personally not that interested. Of course, it's very important for anyone who wants to transition that for them it works. And I want them to get good medical advice. I want them to get the information they need to make their decisions. But for me, I'm not interested in their faith-based belief system. I'm interested in public policy. I'm interested in science. I'm interested in everybody's needs. I'm interested in how we organise this country, this world. I'm interested in women and children and gay people and all the other people too. I'm equally interested in them as I am in trans people. And I'm interested in how we organise society so that everybody can flourish. So this is not a book about trans people. A little further on, I say this is a book about trans activism, because trans activism is very different from trans people. By now, I actually know a lot of trans people. Most of them are just trying to live their lives. They have a highly unusual feeling, which is the feeling that they aren't meant to be the sex that they actually are. And some of them feel that presenting as much like the opposite sex as possible makes them happier. That's fine with me. I'm a 19th century liberal. I want adults to live as they wish. But My right to swing my fist ends where someone else's nose starts. So somebody's right to present themselves as a member of the opposite sex ends where it impacts upon everybody else's rights. So I'm now going to read a little bit from the introduction, and this is the part that if you buy my audiobook when it's finally out is the sample that you get. So I did actually consider bringing it and playing it to rest my voice because I have a cold, but then I listened to it and they make you speak so slowly when you record audiobooks. It's just painful. So what first intrigued me about gender identity ideology was the circularity of its core mantra, trans women are women, which raises and leaves unanswered the question of what then the word woman means. What led me to think further was the vilification of anyone who questioned it. Philosophers who freely debate such thorny topics as whether it is moral to kill disabled babies or remove kidneys from unwilling people for donation have, with few exceptions, been cowed into silence regarding the consequences of redefining man and woman. Journalists who pride themselves on ferreting out the stories that someone somewhere doesn't want them to print have taken one look at paediatric transitioning, males winning women's sporting competitions, and women being sacked for talking about the reality of biological sex, and again, with a few exceptions, turned tail. What finally pushed me to write this book, however, was meeting some of gender identity ideology's most poignant victims. This happened in Manchester almost exactly 2 years ago. I was invited here to the D-Trans Advocacy Network launch, and I already knew something was badly wrong then, very badly wrong. But I was scared. Not really scared because I'm not a scared person, but scared that it was just going to blow up my life. I was finance editor of The Economist at the time, and I had stumbled upon this crazy thing that was happening, which is that people were telling children that your sex didn't matter, what you felt mattered. And I could see that this was going to lead to terrible consequences for children. But I kept thinking, oh God, am I the right person to write this? This is going to be grief. I've got better things to be doing. And then I sat in a room a bit bigger than this, and 6 young women sat in front of me and spoke with their broken voices. Some of them hadn't shaved. One of them had a receding hairline. One of them had her ovaries and her uterus removed at 21, and she was now 23. And they spoke of the eating disorders, the self-hatred, the self-harm. They were all lesbians. The lies that adults had told them, doctors, that this would fix them. And they had come out the other end only to be told that they were bigots and liars in the pay of the Heritage Foundation, and that what they were doing was trying to hurt real trans people. These young women were told that they should know better, that this was their fault, they made this mistake, and they should shut up. So that night was when I decided to write this book. And I'll skip on, and I'll say that ideas have consequences. And one of the consequences of the idea of gender self-identification is that children are being manipulated and damaged. Once you have seen that, it is hard to look away. Well, I say it's hard to look away. A lot of people appear to find it very easy. The detransitioners I know have suffered greatly. They and their counterparts around the world seem to have settled on the lizard emoji as an informal mascot online, a talisman of rejuvenation, recovery, and renewal. Their motive for speaking out is to save other young people from suffering as they did. That is also my motive for writing this book. So what does it feel like when you write a book that says something that's been so obvious until about a half a second ago that you can't believe you have to say it? It's very strange. We all knew that there are 2 sexes. Nobody thought sex was a spectrum. Nobody thought you could change sex. Maybe if you lived in some quite unusual communities, you might know a few people who felt strongly that they had been meant to be the opposite sex, and you would see what you could do to accommodate them. You didn't think people could change sex. You didn't think men could become women. You didn't think women could become men. You certainly didn't think that anyone should tell children this. And yet it seems as if in the blink of an eye, these totally ordinary things mark you as somebody who can be called an anti-Semite, a racist, a transphobe, a child hater, a liar, get people to write to your employer and try and get you sacked. People send you disgusting sexualized threats on social media. So that's what it feels like to have done this. And what I want to say, that I don't think I've said before, but what I badly want to say to this audience is, it's a damn disgrace that women like me have been left to do this work. Because we have a whole industry of people whose job it is to do this work. I want to explain to anyone who doesn't know in detail how the Equality Act works. So the way it works is it brought together almost 100 laws in one overarching law in 2010, And there are 9 protected characteristics under the Equality Act. One of those is sex, and it says sex means male and female. Those words have common law meaning in this country. They mean your immutable biology, what you were conceived as, what was recognised when your mother had an ultrasound scan, what the doctors saw when you were born. That's your sex. Another is gender reassignment, and that's meant to cover people who can't live comfortably in the sex that they actually are and want to present as best they can as the other sex, or perhaps not as their natal sex. Rightly. We've had protections for those people since 1990s, and it's there in the Equality Act. It doesn't change people's sex. They are separate. Both of those things matter, and no characteristic under the Equality Act trumps any other. We also have religion and belief, and that includes lack of religion or belief. So if you are a Muslim or an Orthodox Jew or a conservative Christian who strongly, strongly believes that in some circumstances male and female people cannot mingle, that's a protected belief. And it's as protected as the right of somebody who has the protected characteristic of gender reassignment not to be discriminated against. Did any of you know that? Only those of you who've actually read the Equality Act. Do we ever hear about it? Do we ever hear about all the Muslim women, the Sikh women, the Orthodox Jewish women who are being pushed out of their spaces because people are going to mixed-sex spaces or saying that male people can self-identify into women's spaces? No, and the reason we don't hear about this is because those women are told that they're bigots and they're backward if they say anything. We have a whole apparatus, a state apparatus, that is meant to uphold the Equality Act. Now, I was a foreign correspondent in Brazil for a while. And when I was there, NGO in Portuguese is ONG, and they call the people who work for NGOs ongueiras, and they don't mean something nice. They mean these people who parachute in and tell the locals what they should be doing and then parachute back out again for a nice salary. Well, we have a class of ongueiras who circle around between the government agencies, the big charities that get a lot of government money. They don't actually give a toss about what they're doing, as far as I can tell, because they just go from a charity that does this to a charity that does that to a charity that does the other. They get nice salaries in every one of these places, and they do not stand up and do the job that they were meant to do, unless it's easy. So, I said I was going to name names, didn't I? Well, Fawcett Society. What a wonderful organisation that should have been. Anyone remember what Millicent Fawcett's greatest expression was? Courage calls to courage everywhere. So when Maya Forstater lost her job for simply saying she thought the law should not change to make it easier for male people to declare themselves to be legally female, and she lost her job, did the Fawcett Society say anything about it? What about the Equality and Human Rights Commission? That was set up at the same time as the Equality Act passed. Its entire job is to make sure that the Equality Act is paid attention to by employers and by service providers. It actually says in its remit to foster good relations between people with the different characteristics. So what has it done? So, I mean, the particular thing that I really resent the Equality and Human Rights Commission for not doing was when World Rugby, after doing some excellent research, said it is simply not safe or fair to allow any male people, whether they have changed their legal sex or not, to play in women's rugby because a woman will get her neck broken. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission could really easily have said, do you know what? It says that in the Equality Act. It specifically says right there, it says, if you have a sport that's gender affected, that means a sport where men are stronger or faster or heavier than women, and that matters. It's totally legal to keep male people out of the female competition. It said nothing. Women's Equality Party. Where are they? I mean, what's women's equality if we can't even say that we're women and you're not, and these spaces are for women, and that means you don't come in? And the reason for that, by the way, is because men flash at us, men perv over at us, men rape us, men attack us, men make us feel uncomfortable. Here we are, straight after the whole of life sentence for Sarah Everard's killing, and the same people who are saying institutional sexism, flag down a bus. Ask the police officer if he's really a police officer. But if you see a man in the women's changing room, you're a bigot if you say anything. The same people are saying these things. So who else do I really feel angry with? I have a list. Stonewall, absolutely furious. Stonewall. So another of the protected characteristics is the protected characteristic of same-sex attraction. Sexual orientation is a protected characteristic. We all have it. I'm straight, that's a protected characteristic. If you're gay, that's a protected characteristic. It's recognised in law that that means same-sex orientation. It's male people who only want to sleep with male people. It's female people who only want to sleep with female people. Where's Stonewall? What did Stonewall say at the recent bit of news about sports? They said, oh, massive bigotry, there's no reason to think about this is just transphobia. You know, it's like, come on. Loads of lesbians play sport. Do you not give a toss about them? Answer, no, they don't give a toss about them. And the other people I would say I really am angry with are Index on Censorship. One of the things you learn about in this particular topic is it causes reversals. People do the precise opposite of what they were set up to do. Index on Censorship published in their second last edition an article about how Maya Forstater deserves to go to jail for 6 months. I'm not making this up. For hate crime, for the hate crime of saying she thought the law shouldn't change. Index on Censorship's magazine. Maya asked for a right of reply and she got it, and it's in this issue. And next to it, they put a 2-page spread, the most pathetic, ridiculous, petty, stupid cartoon I have ever seen. It's about somebody saying that they want children to be able to get free school meals, and an actual snake whose name is Satan is saying, we need to have balance, we need to put the opposite side, let's starve the children. And the idea is to say that this is false balance, that there's good people who say sex is not binary, male people can be female if they want, etc. And then there's somebody like Maya, and we're giving her, you know, the right to reply. Satan, a snake. So what happens is you get angrier and angrier. So when I wrote my book, I squashed the anger down, and where I failed, my editor made me try harder. She gave me a budget. She said you can't say the words mutilate for children more than once or twice. Say less about the prisoners, the female prisoners, that they're moving rapists and wife murderers and child rapists in with them into the halfway houses where there are women. This is happening in this country. It's happening in my own country, Ireland. It's happening in Canada, Australia, all over the United States. There are men who have battered, decapitated, raped, serial killed women being moved in with women's prisoners. And do we hear anything from Fawcett? Do we hear anything from the Equality and Human Rights Commission? No. So yes, I'm angry. That's what happens when you write a book like this. You get angrier and angrier. In fact, I'm livid. Absolutely livid. And the last thing I will complain about is all the Dunning-Kruger people out there. Does everyone know this great expression? Dunning-Kruger is the bit at the beginning when you know almost nothing about something and you act like you're some massive, massive expert. And I'm thinking of a certain Labour MP who thinks that hormones and surgeries can give a trans woman a cervix. This man has 3 children. I would like to know what he thought they were saying to his wife 3 times when they said, you're 10 centimetres dilated, it's time to push. These people are passing laws about my body, my rights, what I can call myself, where my children can be. These are the people who are saying that children can be put on a path to sterility if they happen to think that they should have been members of the opposite sex. I'm beyond livid, and I want to know why anyone who isn't. Thank you.
Next to Boudica, it's wonderful. You've set out wonderfully why you wrote the book. I mean, the first question would have been, why? What made you think that this was a book that you needed to write?
Livid.
But you've made that really, really clear. I suppose my first question, I know we're going to get lots of questions from you, I promise I won't take all the time up, is if a few years ago, someone saying, that only women have a cervix and only women have periods, only women give birth, and only women breastfeed, was not a controversial or even brave thing to say. Now it is. All the interviews, David Lammy, interviews with all these other people, Keir Starmer, struggling with things that we shouldn't say, and a Labour MP, Rose Dufford, feeling unsafe to go to her own conference. And what I want to know is, how did we get here? When did it happen? And why did it happen?
God, the whole book was what was needed to write that. I mean,
Read the rest of the book out.
So to give a short answer, it's been a long time coming, but it's been quite marginal. And I would say it's really a big part of the story is that when gay marriage was won, organisations that should just have either scaled back, said, you know, our big task is done, or should have refocused on something that it's harder to get donations for, namely to campaign for gay people in countries where they're still being, you know, hanged and flogged and so on, decided there's not much money in that. You know, rich white men aren't going to pay to look after, you know, men in Saudi Arabia. And by the way, it's hard. You know, it's hard to do something in Saudi Arabia. So instead they went on to what they thought was the next cause, the next thing that they could get money from rich people for. That's just part of the story, but I think it's a really important part. And the other one is that, you know, we've all been conditioned, and this isn't a bad thing mostly, to want to be nice, to be, you know, to the next group of people who've been downtrodden. So I think false analogy has played a huge part in this. You know, allowing male people into female-only spaces is nothing like desegregating the American South. It is nothing like allowing people to marry the person they want to marry. And yet it's presented as if it is, and at drive-by speed it can look like it is. And if you're not engaging your brain and you're not thinking, and if the same people are telling you that this is the next big cause. And then
you'll be on the wrong side of history.
Yeah, screw the wrong side of history. I'm here right now, you know, I've got to use my brain here and now. And I mean, am I going to put a rapist in a women's jail just because in 2050 people are going to think this is a good idea? Like, that's just stupid. So yeah, so I think that feeling of everybody's saying this now, I know that I took a year to really say clearly what I thought, because I kept thinking people I admired and trusted disagreed with me on this. So I was thinking, what am I missing? I kept thinking, what am I missing? I know people can't change sex, but they're saying people can change sex. I know sex isn't a spectrum, but they're saying sex is a spectrum. So I kept quiet for a while. And then most people just move on.
Yeah. We get a lot of the people who are the biggest victims can't move on.
That's right.
And we'll talk about sport and prison, obviously you mentioned as well. But you touched on that there, the idea of that this is the next big civil rights battle. That this is the same as gay rights, you know, it's desegregation and women's rights. Why do you believe it's not? Why do you think that you will, in 50 years' time, be proved right?
I don't think that any civil right can be based on a lie. And I also don't think that any civil right has ever asked other people to give up actual rights. So when black people said, we deserve, you know, the Jim Crow laws are unconscionable, we deserve to be treated as full citizens, they weren't saying, you know, give us something that you should have. They were saying, give us something that you shouldn't have. You're the hoarders of rights. You know, white people in the American South were hoarding rights, to use another of David Lammy's expressions. Women cannot take and play full part in society unless there are women-only spaces. And by women, I mean female people. It's not possible for us to. We have irreducible physical, biological vulnerabilities. The only way that half of humanity can play a full part in society is if we can tell men to get the hell out of places where we are undressing, or places where we're vulnerable, places where we're sleeping. And if we can't do that, we're losing everything. And in particular, the women who have been traumatised, women who are particularly vulnerable, like teenagers, women who have religious beliefs that make it simply impossible for them to share these spaces, are pushed back into the home in order that male people who already have access to spaces get to take our spaces as well. So no, it's not a civil right. It's a taking away of women's civil rights. I think we need a new suffragette movement in order to restate what we said a century ago. We are fully human. We get to say no. We get to state our boundaries.
But it's very strange, I mean, particularly that sort of the latest stages of feminism, particularly younger women. I generally find them to be women who have not yet got to childbearing age, but they're not at the age where they're likely to have children, and don't seem to understand how concerned one would be if their 14-year-old daughter being in Topshop and a man walking in. And that was certainly a big wake-up call to me that this was an issue. But this strange feminism where women are permanently victims, and apparently, I don't know how I even made it into this conference centre without being raped, because apparently I'm going to be raped everywhere I go. I mean, it's extraordinary. You know, I mean, not to make light of that, it does, but the idea that we are permanently victims all the time, to now suddenly being the baddies, We're holding, again, this is part of the double thing. We are holding both of these thoughts in our heads at the same time.
Yes, it's extraordinary to me that all of these people who say, oh, flag a bus down if somebody tries to arrest you, stop him and check that he's actually a real policeman. A lot of the same people put up signs in women's toilets saying if someone looks like they're not meant to be in here, don't be such a bigot. Yeah. That these are the same issue. Men can predate upon women. Male people can predate upon female people. We don't know which ones are safe. We shouldn't go around the place acting as if we're going to be raped at every corner. Of course not. We've got to live our lives. But the way we can live our lives is when we can retreat to women-only spaces where we need to.
What about somebody who would come in here and say, OK, I'll accept you're not a bigot. I'll accept you haven't got hate in your heart. But what's the big deal, love? Why can't you just say a trans woman is a woman? Why can't you use her and she? Why does this bother you so much?
I mean, there's a few answers, and one of them is that laws need to be based on clear definitions. I should say I don't go misgendering people when I'm talking to them. I don't mind being polite to somebody. But when I'm talking about in law who's male or female, or how I'm organising society, I need to be able to say who's male or female. I mean, the example I give to people is, suppose I have a colleague, Joseph, and Joseph comes in and says he's much happier if he lives as Josephine. Fine by me. Yep. HR send a note around, say, good for you, Josephine. Of course I'll call Josephine she. And I mean, I think it's probably right that I would be sacked for harassment if I didn't. Now Josephine wants to use the showers, and in my workplace they are really, really open. No, that's not okay, and I've got to be able to say why it isn't okay. It's not okay because Josephine is male. I've got to be able to use that word. If I can't say Josephine is male, I end up saying Josephine's a trans woman, and now suddenly I'm in a position where I sound like I mind people being trans. I don't care whether someone is trans or not trans. I care whether they're male or female, and I only care where sex matters. Mostly sex doesn't matter, but where it matters, sex matters. Not gender identity. That's fine by me, be whatever you like, call yourself what you like. But where sex matters, it's sex that matters.
And is it just coincidental that when we debate trans women and trans men, that the conversation and the language that is used and the censorship that is used and the changing of language that we've seen only affects women and not men? So we see these rather absurd comments about people who have periods, and I've had that debate on my show with someone. I said, women and girls. No, trans men have periods.
That's because
they're women. And there was an Ofcom complaint, but, I won it because men don't have periods. And these facts matter. But when you talk about birthing parents, when we talk about people with cervixes, what's the other one people always use? Yes, women who have periods. And
bodies with vaginas.
Bodies with vaginas. That was the latest one, wasn't it?
Sounds like serial killer.
Yeah, it really is very. But even when this is something coming out from the NHS, it's done like this. And yet, if it's a cancer charity for men, it's men check your testicles, men check your prostates. The rules are completely different. Why are we only talking about the threat of the ideology around trans women and not trans men?
So I suppose there's two reasons. One is that men don't suffer the same way when women get into their spaces. I mean, men don't want it. Most men don't actually want to go and use the urinal when there's a woman standing next to them. They get embarrassed.
I go into men's loos a lot when there's a queue, so that's true.
Yeah.
And they don't like queuing for the loo.
Yeah. But they're not scared.
Yeah.
And they could say to you, oh, come on, love, you don't do that, without thinking that you're going to punch them. Yeah. So there's an asymmetry, an irreducible asymmetry. It matters more to women. Also, women don't tend to be the sex offenders. They don't tend to be the ones who are voyeurs. They don't tend to be the ones who are flashing. Those are men. So it matters a lot more that men are kept out of women's spaces than that women are kept out of men's spaces. But the other one is, I've never seen sex differences and sex hierarchies as clearly as with people who deny their sex. So when I look at trans men, and whenever you see trans men in the news, it's always because they're pregnant. So it's just the kind of thrill of seeing somebody with a beard and maybe a receding hairline and a broken voice, but they've got pregnant belly. And this charms the journalist who's writing it. But when you talk about trans women, you're talking about their achievements. And often you're calling them women's achievements. Like Laurel Hubbard has just won a New Zealand Sportswoman of the Year award. Just such an insult, such a slap in the face. Absolutely disgraceful. Or, it's the world's best female gamer, it's a male. The world's first female tech billionaire, it's a male, So that's the other reason, is that male people do still run the world to a pretty considerable extent. So they're kind of imposing themselves upon women, and they're the ones who've got the power and the money and the energy to just rewrite everything in a way that trans men aren't.
Is it deliberate, do you think? Is it? But again, I'm like you. I've come across it certainly through my work a number of trans people who have television shows and radio interviews, and I've never felt anything other than the same warmth I would feel towards anybody of any background or sexuality or gender. It doesn't bother me. Not an issue at all. Wasn't raised in that sort of background. But we are in a situation where clearly things have gone further. So
the most entitled people in the world are some pretty powerful men. That's basically where I'll stop.
Okay. Right. How important is language? So when someone says, I've had someone on my radio station say, well, you're a cis woman. I've said, no, I'm not. I'm a woman. I'm not a cis woman. I refuse to accept I'm a woman. I'm perfectly happy to use the phrase trans woman, but I won't agree that a trans woman is a woman. How important is it that this ideology that you talk about is changing language and changing the meaning of words? So I can't just say I am a table. People just laugh at me and say it's stupid. But you can say I'm a woman, and we're supposed to go okay.
Yeah.
But how important is holding on to the societal meanings of words? Because if you think this colour is white and I think this colour is black, then it has no meaning at all.
Yes, that's right.
So
I mean, if the word woman is rewritten to mean some male people and some female people with no characteristics in common except that they're human, based only on what they say, then the word woman is a meaningless word. Yes. And we have laws that say that women can have certain things, like single-sex spaces, like women-only sports, like we have a female estate in prisons. So if we've ruined the word, then we've ruined those things. So that's the big reason why it's important. But it's also important because to stand up for our rights, we need to be able to speak. And we need to be able to speak without fear and without using weird circumlocutions. So if you think about these weird circumlocutions like, people with periods or bodies with vaginas or whatever, I mean, they're bloody disgusting, One of my male colleagues, who's a very good friend, walked into my office on Monday and he said, hello, person with a vagina. What did you do this weekend? This person with a penis did such and such. And I just thought, you know what? I actually don't like this. This is horrible. I don't.
There's a reason why we wear underwear. We don't have to discuss it.
Exactly. I wanted to be able to use these nice, ordinary words, man and woman, male and female, that didn't go straight to what genitals people had, It's so strange to me that the people who use this language are the people who claim that I'm obsessed with people's genitals. I'm not the one who wants to be calling people penis havers or things like that. This is being forced upon me because the words have been destroyed. And if I want to, I don't have any trans colleagues, by the way, but if I want to go and say to HR, it is not okay that this trans woman uses these spaces because we get naked in them and this trans person is actually male, I need to be able to say what I'm talking about. Yeah. So that's why it matters.
I know people are itching to ask questions, so I'm going to just keep it short. But you touched on prisons. That is, I may not want to be in a changing room with a biological male, but I can hold my handle myself, and I don't feel that would be an issue because I could at least leave. In prison, you can't. The situation I think that's been happening in prisons is something that when I've discussed it with people, they've been shocked and thought that I was making it up.
Yes, of course.
Talk a bit about what is actually happening in prisons and
so
the scale of which it's happening.
The government here has been back and forth on whether to allow people to self-identify into what prison they want. And you will notice that female people do not tend to identify into male prisons for bloody good reasons. Now, for a start, very few female people actually end up in jail. About 4% of the people in jail, I remember right, it's...
Yeah, women.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, are female. And none of them, as far as we know, are held in the male estate. I mean, I think there are some people who are so delusional they might consider that, but anyway, mostly not. It's the other way round. And I cannot believe that there are people who have the cheek to call themselves feminists, who are not up in arms at the idea about male people being foisted on female people who are among the world's most vulnerable people. Women in jail, overwhelmingly, have had head injuries, suffered childhood abuse, have suffered domestic abuse, suffered drug addiction, have been in prostitution, sometimes all of these things. They're people who've been raped already repeatedly. They're people who don't trust men for bloody good reason. And then a person who is obviously a man, come on, we're not blind. One of the things that's always absolutely swept over in this whole discussion, I'm perfectly well able to see who's male and who's female. We're evolved to be able to do that. They're being put into women's prisons. And Britain isn't as bad as some other places. California has 300 men either transferred to women's prisons or waiting for it very soon, including a charmer who murdered his wife when she came home and found him cross-dressing in her clothes, and he throttled her with a piano wire so viciously that he nearly took her head off, and then fled in a car. That man is now in a women's prison. And if you hear this and you're not disgusted and angered, then there is something wrong with you morally.
Gosh.
Sorry, I just add one more. There's a man in a women's halfway house in Canada. Among his many crimes is that he raped a 3-month-old baby so
Jesus Christ.
seriously that the child needed intestinal reconstructive surgery. That man was put into a women's halfway house.
Yeah.
These are human rights abuses.
And this is very real. It's happening right now, and it's happening to very vulnerable girls, women.
In the name of inclusion,
Julia.
Julia.
In the name of inclusion. Well, I think we've had enough bigotry from you tonight. So I'm going to end this evening. Right, shall we look? I'm going to go a bit earlier to questions because I know there's just so many people. Lady at the front.
Hello, my name's Fatima. I joined the Conservative Party 2 years ago. I joined the Conservative Party 2 years ago, and can anyone hear?
Yeah.
Hold it a bit closer.
Okay. Oh
Perfect.
yes. Okay. Right. Yeah. And obviously, I was with Baroness Nicholson with the first committee meeting she did regarding this issue on single-sex wards. Now, obviously, you've talked about the dangers. I want to talk about language. Now, obviously, I've talked to my MP who I work with and our fellow constituency MPs. Now, even they still use the phrase LGBT people, and many in our ward...
Can you keep the mic up to your mouth? Sorry.
Many in our ward and constituency who are gay or lesbian, they said, I'm not an LGBT person, I'm gay, I'm a lesbian. What do you think about the language and the minefield around language?
On LGBT specifically.
Yeah.
So I think LGBT people do have some natural common causes. You know, they live in a world that is heteronormative. And I think if you're talking about an alliance and a support for gender non-conforming people in different ways, that could be a really fruitful thing. But that's not what people like Stonewall do. What they have done is they have redefined man and woman to mean self-declared identities and not physical realities. And straight away, it means nothing then to be gay or straight. Now, I'm straight, so it just basically doesn't make much difference to me because we're the great majority. The people it makes a big difference to are lesbians in particular. Gay men don't have a great time about it, but, there's not that many female people who think of themselves as trans men who are able to force themselves on men in aggressive and, forceful, will not take no for an answer ways. It's male people who think of themselves as lesbians who are forcing themselves on lesbians.
A lot of lesbians say, they don't like the term, I'm having a relationship with a woman without a penis.
Of course they don't like it. Yeah. I mean, they're lesbian.
Yeah.
But the no penis is kind of the point.
But what's happening in some of these dating sites is that you're being called a bigot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
If you refuse to date
I talk to people who are
with a
kicked
penis.
off dating sites for saying female only. For transphobia, barred for life. They're lesbian. That's the point.
That's the interesting thing that Stonewall is so pro this particular trans ideology, when actually this is actually...
It's homophobic.
Yeah, it is. But it's threatening to wipe out gay
and
women.
It's threatening to wipe them out in another way too, which is, I didn't know this until I started researching the book, but there's a very, very strong link between being very gender non-conforming early in life and growing up to be gay. So, a lot of people are born gay. And the way it shows before puberty has come along and taught you what it is that was different about you, what's different about you is that you prefer the things that are more commonly preferred by the opposite sex. This does not mean that every child who's gender non-conforming is going to grow up gay. But statistically, it's more common. Those are the kids who are now being told that they're trans. Now, they're being put onto a path that takes them to sterility, sexual misfunction. They may say that they're happy enough because they've never known anything different, but we've never done any trials of saying that some kids do this and some kids don't. They're kids who would probably have grown up to be happy gay people, fully functioning, not dependent on doctors, not having gone through difficult and painful operations. So it matters for gay people in two ways.
But again, if you're heterosexual, if you're in your, I know, women who say they don't want to have kids and they've gone to doctors saying, I'd like to be sterilised in their 20s, and the doctors won't do it.
No, not
but
until
they'll
you're in
do
your
it
late
to
30s.
16, 17, 18.
Oh, but they'll do it to 10-year-olds, Julia. There were three 10-year-olds discussed in the first hearing of Keira Bell's case. The Tavistock had put 3 10-year-olds on puberty blockers. Now, the statistics on puberty blockers are that if you go on, it's 98% likely that you will go on to cross-sex hormones. Now, if you never go through your own puberty, you will not just be infertile, you will be sterile. We don't become, fertile unless we go through our own puberty. And under oath, the endocrinologist for the Tavistock said, I didn't need to talk about that to these 10-year-olds because if they wanted, when they were 14, they could come off the puberty blockers for 6 months, have their ovaries, they were all 3 girls, have their ovaries develop enough that we could collect some eggs for them and they could freeze them. Egg freezing doesn't work very well. Both my own children are by IVF. I've been through this crap. It's not easy, and there's no guarantee at the end. I didn't need to find a uterus somewhere to carry those kids. 10-year-olds put on a path they cannot possibly understand. And those little girls were probably just lesbian.
It's utterly heartbreaking.
It
The
is.
gentleman who's got the microphone over here.
Thank you. Bob Hughes, Chairman of Surrey Area Conservatives. I worked with Stonewall some years ago when they were seeking equality of the age of consent because I thought they were right. And I've been deeply shocked at what they've turned into. And I thought, well, maybe it's just me getting old. Maybe I'm just not keeping up with these things. But actually, I regard this as child abuse, what you were just talking about. It plainly is. And also very, very anti-women, putting them in an invidious position. I have worked with people who are trans, and that's fine, providing actually they understand that other people have rights too. And I was delighted that when Police and Crime Commissioner Lisa Townsend took a lead on this, and I'm very proud about that. Give her a applause. And I'm glad she's not a lone voice. I think we just need to be louder and louder, but we have to defeat these people, I think.
Yep. Yeah, it is going to be looked back on as a major medical scandal. Always remember that the person who invented the lobotomy won a Nobel Prize for it.
Lady at the front.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say to everyone, read the book if you didn't read, already, because it's fantastic. I think it's really one of the best books I ever read. So, huge compliments. Thank you for what you're doing, because you're a true hero. I'm a mother myself. Thank God my children are grown up now, but I would be terrified to have, young children now in a school where they kind of brainwash them with all these theories. I truly believe it's brainwashing. I have a lot of questions because you definitely know better. One of the things that I was thinking about before when we were talking about the language, this horrible cis language, I'm the same, like, don't cis me. I'm like, I don't accept that, right? I mean, I'm a woman. But the Equality Act is actually protecting us if we keep using man and woman, not only male and female, because I know we are going on into biology, using that, but I'm like old school. I would like to keep using women, and men. Are they protecting us, even if on Twitter?
Yeah, no, it's the EHRC refusing to stand up and say, that's the definition. It says it in the Equality Act. It says a man is a male person of any age, and the reason it says that is so they don't have to keep writing man and boy, women and girl. And male and female have common law meanings in this country. They mean really the same thing for humans as they mean
T-shirts
for
on the
everybody.
T-shirt.
Yes, I want to say amazing.
Yeah. So no, these things are there. It's because is it capture? Is the people have come into these organisations? Is it because they're asleep at the wheel? Is it because they're stupid? I doubt it. Is it because they're cowardly? Maybe. But these organisations that are supposed to be standing up for us aren't. And so, I mean, what I would say is try to make them.
Yeah, can we challenge them? What do you think?
So I think there's various judicial reviews that people are trying to bring, and generally speaking, you have to have a harm that's happened in order to try to bring a case. I meant to say something else about the cis thing. The reason that we all hate the word cis so much is because it's already made the argument, if you use it. So I was brought up Catholic, and I now regard myself as an atheist. Suppose I said I was a heretic, right? If people said, it's fine, you're not a Catholic anymore, you're a heretic, what that's saying is, yes, your God exists, yes, you're right about the way the universe looks, but you have decided inexplicably and evilly to disregard the reality of, God 3 in 1, Jesus came down to earth, whatever. So that's what Cis is doing. Cis is saying, okay, I believe all of that stuff. And even believing all of that stuff, that that the stereotypes make you who you are, you're happy with the stereotypes. I'm not happy with the stereotypes. I was conceived female, and I didn't die before I became an adult, and that's the only reason I'm a woman.
Gentleman over here.
Hi, Michael Farmer. Firstly, thanks very much. I mean, it's great stuff, and I think, did the Spectator call you the only adult standing up in the room?
Somebody did.
Yeah, well, it's perfectly true, and what you've been saying today is so necessary for people to hear. And what gets me is, say ideology meets reality. It could say meets biology, but how do we get this far that you've got Parliament, you've got the BBC, you've got the civil service, you've got everyone suddenly coming out and saying, you've got to say, him, her, or whatever it is, and accept something which, according to the polling, most people think is nonsense. And you've got this sort of middle that's sort of dominating everything, and we're all scared stiff. Now, there's the Twitter sphere, I suppose. So you're not having the real dialogue, which is what we're having today. And my question is really, how do we move forward from here? You're the front runner, and you're a great encouragement to us all. And we would like to move forward and, all right, put our heads above the parapet, be articulate. But, what do we do to stand up against this nonsense?
I think one of the things everyone can do, if you're involved in a school in any way, if you have a child or if you have a relative who's in school, ask what they're teaching. Because again, the Equality Act is really clear, and Liz Truss has said nobody's to be coming into schools and telling children that stereotypes are what make people who they are. So you can challenge these things. Schools have teachers who went through university and the awful courses, and then went on awful teacher trainer courses. They learned a load of old nonsense that they spew out in class. They use books like I Am Jazz. This poor child who was, manipulated and abused on television from age 7 or so, who says, I had a girl brain in a boy body and was castrated for the pleasure of the watching audience at age 18. So they read books like that in school. You have right on your side and you have the law on your side. So don't let it happen. Keep pushing back. And don't let anyone tell you that you're a bigot or that you're wrong. We're lucky with our laws in this country. The Equality Act is very good and it's very clear. Now, I wish the AHRC would come out with guidance. You shouldn't be having to do this. It should be done at national level. So if you're somebody who's in a position to influence people at a higher level, do so. If you're a police commissioner, if you're an MP, if you're on the board of something, if you're in a big multinational, you should be trying to do this work yourself in those places. This is not the first time something like this has happened. There's a lovely expression, pluralistic ignorance. You probably think that the people around you don't think the same as you, but they do. Most people do. That's the useful thing about these polls. So if you say, I'm very worried about what they're doing to kids, or I saw this male person, went to the Olympics for New Zealand. That was weird. Did you see that? Did you know that they're putting rapists in women's jails? Nearly nobody thinks that's a good idea. People aren't stupid. They know that's a stupid idea. So if you surface that, then people will say, God, are they really doing that? No, you can't be right. Can they really be doing that? It's called peak transing them. Peak trans people.
This is one of the things that people don't know about it, because it's rather difficult to get people to talk about a subject if they think that the person talking about it's a bigot.
Yeah.
You've been on my show a number of times, and I know my whole team are all very young and woke, because everyone who works in television and radio is unbelievably young and woke, and they were, oh, she's very good, but they were sort of, is that all true? Is that
Yeah,
actually?
of course.
And again, we talked about it, but you really something they actually sort of held on to. But you found it very difficult to speak in other mainstream media about your book, which I would have thought would have been welcomed as a book about women's rights. My God, we never hear anything but in lots of mainstream media, and yet you struggle to get on
So,
BBC,
yeah,
haven't you?
I haven't been on the BBC at all. I've been invited and then cancelled, which I feel was a recent and actual progress. Like they got as far as inviting me and then decided against it. Do you know what? It's been incredibly freeing just deciding I don't give a shit.
Except you do need to give a shit because you need to get the message out to the...
I know I do, but it's working
wider
fine,
audience.
isn't it? The book's been reviewed loads of places. I've been on loads of podcasts. I'm here now talking about it. You know, people are following me on Twitter. My feeling is at this point, you know, if the Women's Equality Party and if Fawcett and if the BBC and if The Guardian aren't going to cover these issues, screw them. Let them die. We'll be over here reporting on reality and talking about rights, and they can just wither. And the same, by the way, you know, with any political party that doesn't care about women's rights, we'll be over here, thanks a bunch. Stonewall. Stonewall can go and LGB Alliance can come.
Oh, thank you very much. Can I be cued in for that one? Because I'm the chair of the trustees of the LGB Alliance.
Yay!
Thank you very much. And I only agree to do it because I don't have an employer and I don't have any clients, because I wouldn't be able to do it because I would be cancelled and my business would be ruined if I did. And I just wanted to say about the freedom of speech thing, because I think this is absolutely incredible. And this is a wee advert for LGB Alliance, if you don't mind. But the only reason we exist, because most of the people who founded it, not me, were very much involved in Stonewall, and even before that, the Gay Liberation Front. When Stonewall pivoted towards the trans issue, fair enough, if that's what they want to do, but they wouldn't debate it. Once they said they would do this, they wouldn't actually have a conversation about it. So my friends formed LGB Alliance. They're older women. They didn't want to have to do it, but they did it because there had to be another voice. Because nowadays, Stonewall does not, as you all know, but they don't stand up for young lesbians and gay boys. And we're talking about girls and boys. And you all know this, but it breaks my heart that a young girl like me, who liked to play with boys' toys, I had a fantastic life as a young lesbian. I was a great life because I had brilliant freedoms. But why I came into this was that the young me would be told, with science behind them, no science, you know, you probably are a boy. You were just born in the wrong body. Isn't that such a shame? And then we've got this great solution for you, and it's drugs, surgery. And if you haven't read it, I'm sure you have, but there's 51 young teenagers, girls in Scotland, have been approved for surgery. 51, that was a freedom of information thing came through. So, I mean, no one wanted to have an LGB alliance. It's also, you know, it's internecine warfare between gays and trans, and it was also nonsense. This is fundamentally important. And we can't go on the BBC. They won't talk to us. They won't. We can't get heard. Although I do think there's some columnists now, that Janice Turner, and I think it will turn around. I'm very optimistic. But that's why we exist, and I'm just saying, if you want to come by our stand number 38.
You're very welcome on my talk radio show. We'll get you on.
I will accept that. But I've never been to a fringe meeting that I felt so motivated that I want to shout out and cheer, because it's quite lonely sometimes. Because it really is lonely. You think, am I the only person? Has everyone else gone completely nuts? But anyway, that's all I'm going to say. LGBT Alliance, come and see us. We are the new Stonewall. We are what Stonewall was, and they should be. Same-sex attraction. Sex exists.
So one of the things that's so great about events like this is that it grounds you back in reality, because it's crazy making. This whole thing is crazy making. They're making us so disorientated that you feel like you're on thin ice the whole time, and black is white and up is down and in is out. And so you're back with people who remember that reality exists and are using words properly the same way that you are. And it reminds you you're not mad. So I would say about the things like, you know, having to give up on Stonewall and so on, I too grieve. There was a lot of social capital put into these organisations like Fawcett Society and Stonewall. But we've got to abandon things that we can't fix. Like, it's worth trying to fix things, but at some point you have to give up and move on. And it's not worth looking back and regretting. We move forward.
I do. You've got the microphone over there, gentleman over there.
Hi, Gillis Robbie here from various websites I'm writing for. So these two articles that I wrote, the first one was about the mermaid group suing the Charity Commission to remove the charitable status of the LGBT Alliance on grounds their views were not worthy of respect in democratic society. The second one was about a man who was from LGBT Alliance that was escorted away from the Manchester Pride event a few weeks ago.
Oh, he's here. Hello.
And my question sort of was, looking into this, because I sort of didn't look into this before it all sort of exploded on social media with J.K. Rowling last year. Looking in, it seems to be quite shocking that one part of like the sort of LGBT, the transgender people that claim they were victimised and have been oppressed for so long now seem to be oppressing the LGBT part of that community. So I just wanted to ask, what were your thoughts on that?
I tried never to personalise things. I tried to talk about policies, laws, definitions, and so on. You know, I would say of trans people that I've never seen a group so poorly served by their lobbyists. There is going to be a horrible, horrible backlash. If you look at the things where trans activism is loudest and noisiest, it is on getting rapists into women's jails, male people into women's sports, and sterilising children. I can't think of three policies that would be more damning for any group. It positions trans people, all trans people, and of course they're absolutely not, but these activists position trans people as careless of women's rights, careless of children's well-being, and actually completely barking mad. Like the sports thing is just barking, it's there in front of us. So I feel sometimes that I'm trans people's best friend because I'm trying to stop this before it all goes so hideously wrong that the backlash is horrendous. So I don't want to say anything about, oh, there's, a fight by the T against the LGBT. I don't think there is. Loads of trans people are perfectly sane. There's just this crazy activism that's based on a lie. So we need to talk about the definitions, the truth, the biological reality, and refuse to personalise it.
Gentleman here.
Thank you. My name is Omar. I am from a small organization called London Arabia. You mentioned the Arab world, you mentioned the Muslim women, and a few years back I was invited to go to a Zatari refugee camp in Jordan, and I met with Syrian women. One of the women asked me what the people in the UK and in the West think of us. To be honest, I couldn't answer her. I couldn't tell her they think you are subservient to men. I couldn't tell her that the Western media have the stereotype about you. My question is, because we do organize something to empower Arab women called the Arab Women of the Year Award, which was actually created when Boris Johnson was the Mayor of London. And unfortunately, we had someone else as the Mayor of London who's useless. And then my question is, well, is it right, after what you mentioned about Canada, America, and all these problems they are facing, is it right to say that Western countries, Western democracy, have solved human rights in the Arab world? They exchange it with trade deals, and then they ignore it for many years, and then they keep ignoring it until now, just because there is a deal being signed somewhere?
Sort of off topic.
It is. I'm so sorry.
I don't know. I honestly don't feel I can answer that fairly. But what I will say is, people's religious beliefs are actually protected under the Equality Act here. And I've talked to a lot of people whose religious beliefs require them just to recognise who's male and who's female. But they're afraid to say this because it makes them sound like they're backwards, or people. I've had people say this to me, like, why should that person's beliefs harm somebody else's human rights? I'm like, well, their beliefs are actually human rights. So I think, until religious people, people of faith, start to stand up unapologetically and say, our beliefs are protected, they're there in the Equality Act, no, it's not okay, you're trampling on our rights too. And then secular atheists like me will stand up and say, yes, completely right, women have boundaries, women have the right to set their boundaries. A Muslim woman or an Orthodox Jewish woman will set them in a somewhat different place from me, but I completely support my sisters' rights to set their boundaries where they wish to set them. And we must make that coalition. I know it's not an answer to your question, but it's the only bit I'm actually an expert on. I'm sorry.
I think the gentleman over here's got a microphone.
Hey, yeah.
Quick question.
I'm Jack. I actually work at the BBC, which I know is Newsnight, actually, which actually did a very good investigation into this.
Yes. Okay.
I've got two questions. Essentially, this is all quite new to me, so I'm just... Number one, is there anything that you think is... When someone has essentially taken off their sexual organs, i.e. medically transitioned, is there a difference there? Because that was the interesting thing to me, was that obviously a lot of people who behave as trans people haven't actually transitioned medically, which obviously you assume they have as someone who hasn't got much experience.
And there's a very strong strategic interest in leaving you confused about that matter.
Yeah. And number two is just legislative response. Do you think there should be either no transition before 2118? I mean, is there a legislative thing that now needs to happen, basically?
I definitely think that children shouldn't be allowed to transition in any sense. Adults have more control, obviously, over what they do with their bodies. So the way that all the laws came in the first place was for people who had gone through medical transition, specifically men who had removed their penis and testicles. And, you know, you can see why somebody might think, well, that person's much less of a threat than they might be if they still had their genitals. But that has been long ago ruled as not a proper grounds for allowing a sex change because it sterilises you. And nothing that is presented as a right can be predicated on being sterilised. So there's been this extraordinary ratchet effect. So doctors started doing these things before it was recognised legally. And then people said, look, doctors are doing it, so you must recognise it legally. So then they recognised it legally for people who had sex changes. And then it was time for the human rights cases saying, you're making a sex change, a legal sex change, dependent on me getting sterilised. And that's the way they present it, Should trans women have to be sterilised to be recognised as trans women? Well, yes, is the answer there, but no, it can't be. So we can't go back to a situation. It's impossible legally to go back to a situation where we make legal recognition as a member of the opposite sex dependent on having gone through transition. That's over.
But would you be pro-legislatively the House of Commons?
No, but they can't. It's at international level. International human rights law has already ruled that out. So whether you think it should be or shouldn't be, it can't be. So it's just a dead end, that one. Personally, I don't think we should allow any legal sex change anymore. And the reason I don't think we should is because the reasons for it no longer pertain. So when you look back at the early cases, it was about marriage. Well, we now have same-sex marriage. It was about bureaucratic things like having pensionable ages that were different. We've got rid of almost all of those. What I would support is that every person is given a birth certificate that has no sex on it, as well as their long-form one that has their sex on it. And that what happens legally is, in those few situations where sex matters, you're asked to show your long-form birth certificate, and everywhere else you can show your short-form birth certificate which has no sex on it, so that nobody knows your sex when sex doesn't matter. And this, to me, would answer all the issues about how trans people can live with dignity, privacy, comfort, etc., without any of us having to lie.
Okay. Over back.
Hello. I was just wondering, I grew up in Northern Ireland, and I was just interested, do you think this trans activism is as vocal right across the UK equally, or is it at different levels in each of the 4 nations of the United Kingdom?
So it's crazy in Scotland, completely gone beyond bananas, because the Scottish National Party has taken this issue on as if it's the most important issue after independence, and they run the place as an autarky. It's pretty bad in Wales. It's very sectarian in Northern Ireland, from what I know. So it's quite a Catholic, strangely, thing. But I'm not. This is just something that someone was telling me recently. And in England, it's heading towards being a party political issue, which I hope it doesn't become, because there are really good groups within the various parties, apart from the Lib Dems. Well, there are some very good women, but within the Lib Dems, but I mean they're just completely silenced. So I'm afraid it might split here. So it is quite different, actually, in different places. But Scotland's just gone bananas.
One last question from the back over there. I'm sure there was a couple of hands up I saw. There we go.
Hello. Hi, my name's Caroline Newton. I found this really fascinating.
Can you put the microphone to your mouth?
Yeah, this has been really fascinating, and it's very topical in my family, where I've got 2 children, one of whom is a girl, and the other one has decided to change his pronouns to he, to they, them. I keep forgetting. I keep referring to her as my daughter. I keep yelling up the stairs, girls, time to get up, all that kind of stuff, which doesn't go down very well. But strikes me as being, for that generation, they are 13, very, it's like a psychological epidemic.
Yeah.
With this particular child, it came to a head during the COVID lockdown, quite difficult for them. You see, I'm doing quite well with this. I'm not nearly as good at this at home. But we've had these conversations exactly very similar to the ones we've had this evening here about the difficulty when women's vulnerabilities are broached by potentially men or transgender women coming into women's spaces. And I think we've got to a point where my children kind of can see that is an issue, and they wouldn't push their rights as trans children quite as far as that. Are they trans children, or are they just non-gender children? Anyway. See, it's
God, dinner time must be
confusing.
exhausting.
It's utterly exhausting. I find it completely confusing, as I think probably most people of my generation do, actually. And I think it's a minefield for us, because we don't want to upset them. We don't want to make them feel that they're not going through a genuine experience. But equally, it just goes against... I mean, the grammar of it worries me as much as anything. I can't refer to one child as they. But in any case, so I suppose where I'm heading with this as a question is, how do we have these conversations with young people for whom this is the new frontier, isn't it? I mean, my mother was fought for feminism. We've had the conversations through the generations about different sexualities and all that. And this is a really important, very real conversation for teenagers.
Yeah. Without sort of shutting it down and them immediately thinking you're a bigot.
Yeah. Exactly. Sorry, very long question, sorry.
I think it's incredibly important as a parent that you remain open to the fact that your child is trying to tell you something. Now, your child is not telling you that they're not a boy or a girl, because that's not possible. They're either a boy or a girl, and they were conceived that way, and you know from when they were born, which they are. But they are trying to express something. And so the usual parenting advice of being respectful, of remaining open to trying to read behind the things that they say to you. And if you want to get into a conversation, like somebody's asked me this once before in an online webinar, said, how can I convince my child that this is all nonsense? Well, if you go in with that attitude, you don't succeed. So I think, they mean something different than what you think they mean, and you have to have the conversation on an equal ground. So things like, can we take turns to ask each other questions? Can I suggest something that you could read and you suggest something that I read? And, be very open to the insights that your child has. I mean, I don't know if you listened to the Gender A Wider Lens podcast by Stella O'Malley and Sasha Ayad. They did a beautiful one on non-binary kids a few weeks ago. And they said that they hear children who say they're non-binary as saying, I'm out. I'm out of all of this. I'm out of this girls have to wear pink. I'm out of the porn. I'm out of the boys can't cry. I'm out. That strikes me as a very sensible thing. So maybe that's what your child is saying to you, and you can kind of loosen up on the truth claim. Like, your child is not making a truth claim, I'm neither a boy or a girl. Not really, because that's not possible. They're trying to express something to you. And if you can meet them where the thing that they're expressing to you is a real thing that's meaningful to them and that probably has psychological importance for them and is maybe helping them to navigate a world that is very, very gendered, much more gendered than when we were children.
Yeah, that's true.
And then hopefully your child can come out the other side and maybe this identity won't matter so much, because these things are incredibly about fashion. Nothing stays fashionable forever. But anyway, hopefully this will help your child not to then go into identifying as the opposite sex and then into drugs and so on and so forth. Lighten up a bit about non-binary is what I'd say.
I am so pleased we got to your question.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Can I ask you just one final one for me? When you hear people like Keir Starmer and others who've been making their statements and you shouldn't say that, and when people with services, do you think that they believe it?
No, of course not. Absolutely not. There are people who believe it, but you can see when people are telling the truth about what they believe and what they don't. When people are sort of umming and ahhing, and Rachel Reeves, shifting and, you shouldn't say that. What do you mean you shouldn't say that? Like, if you actually believe it, you could do better than that. So I think they just don't want to be put on the spot. And, I have some sympathy there. You're a party leader who's got, you've got rid of the anti-Semites. you've managed to get rid of Jeremy Corbyn, you've managed to change the electoral rules a bit so that, they can't do another Jeremy Corbyn or whatever. And along people come and they're talking about damn cervixes. And what you want to be saying is Boris Johnson is not the sort of leader we need in these difficult times. You've got your own message. I'm sorry, this one can't be triangulated. It just can't be. It'd be much better to just say, I support the Equality Act as it is. The definition of man and woman are there. That's fine. Of course, trans people also have rights. Of course, everybody has human rights. Can we move on,
Live
please?
your best life, yes.
Yeah.
I wonder, just finally, yes, I'll get rid of, but just finally, hands up, who this is, and sort of an existential thing that you will actually consider changing your vote based on a party and what they say on this. We're probably not representative.
No, but it's interesting.
But it's interesting, yeah. I mean, that's certainly how I feel. Right, Miriam Cates is going to say a wrap up. Yes, we've not left much space there, have we?
We're good.
Sure, thank you. I'm Miriam Cates. I'm the Member of Parliament for Penistone and Stocksbridge, and I've been given the unenviable task of summing up this fantastic debate. And I have to say, I've never seen such a lively bunch of dinosaurs, so it's been a really, really fantastic debate to be part of. I want to say thank you to all the speakers, Angela, who opened brilliantly, Helen, and of course, and Julia, and all the people who asked such brilliant questions. And also want to add my thanks to Jackie, who's been an absolute star and hero in this debate, particularly in the House of Commons. I think this issue has been wrongly labelled as just another battle in the culture war, hasn't it? And the implication in that is that it's along the same lines as which statues you should take down or whether ministers should be allowed to have a picture of the Queen in their office. But of course, as we've heard so compellingly tonight, it's completely wrong to say that this is just another contest in that culture war. It's not a minor issue that politicians and governments and institutions can ignore or wish away. It's actually an enormous issue of safety to women and women's rights. And of course, women's rights have been won on the basis of the fact that there is such a thing as a woman, that women are different to men, our biology, our psychology, our role as mothers, the experience we have. And if we erode the concept of women, we erase the rights of women. Of course, we can't just stand by and let that happen, as we've heard so passionately tonight. And I admit, when I first became aware of this debate, I was baffled. As a science teacher, I couldn't understand how it's controversial to say that only women have a cervix or only women give birth. And as a genetics graduate, I couldn't understand what's controversial about saying that sex is determined at conception. It's which lucky sperm meets the egg. And then those sex chromosomes are in every single cell of your body for the rest of your life. That's a scientific fact. It's not controversial. And so I just assumed that this debate would fizzle out. And it's been very insightful, actually, to hear your explanation of why it hasn't fizzled out and the kind of other interests involved in the issue. And I think we have to sit up and take notice when we have elected politicians saying things like, those who want to deny males access to women's spaces are dinosaurs who want to hoard rights. Of course, that was David Lammy last week. Or that there shouldn't be sex-segregated facilities for women in schools and hospitals. That was Alex Sobel. So I think we have to recognise that women are in real danger, even if, as you say, perhaps some of the people who are saying this don't really believe it, but they certainly believe that they have to say it, which is, of course, a fact that we need to take into account. But far from being hoarders of rights, women have actually had to fight incredibly hard, and many men on our behalf, to have any rights at all. And whilst we are thankfully equal with men now in a legal sense, and that's something to be very thankful for and to celebrate, there is one area where we are very much unequal and probably always will be, and that's in the area of physical and sexual power, as you've said. And for all sorts of biological reasons that we've gone into a bit tonight, men can choose to exert that physical and sexual power over us. And that's why it's so important that we do have those spaces in our most vulnerable areas, toilet facilities, hospital wards, prisons, schools, when fleeing domestic abuse, where we can be safe. And to suggest that women who think that that is a good idea are bigots and dinosaurs is just unbelievable. It's madness, as you've said, and it denies the truth of the inequality that will always exist between men and women. As human beings, we don't get to choose every aspect of our identity, whether that's our sex, our nationality, our family history, where we were born. Identity is complex, but it's undeniably based on external factors and inherent factors, as well as our choices and preferences. They're all important. And in a tolerant and liberal society, everybody should be free, all adults should be free to live how they choose within the law. And I love the quote from Helen's book where she says, "Most people are in the dark about what's being demanded by trans activists. They understand the call for trans rights to mean compassionate concessions that enable a suffering minority to live full lives in safety and dignity." And we are all right behind that, and the public would be too. And that's why the public, support rights for the whole LGBT community. But as we've heard tonight, that's not the limit of the trans activists' ambitions. And I think particularly, we touched on it, what's happening in schools is terrifying, particularly in secondary schools, but also in primary schools. And actually, if you want to write to your MP, and believe me, I don't encourage people to write to their MP often, but would be to ask them to find out from the DfE, what are their policies? Because I think there are a lot of head teachers who probably are sound on this issue, but who daren't impose any kind of rules or any kind of restrictions or any kind of of policies because they know their job's on the line. And actually, if the DfE came out with, stuck to the Equalities Act, gave guidelines about which sex-segregated facilities schools have to provide, which materials they're allowed to use in RSE lessons, which organisations they're allowed to have in schools. If that was there in black and white, it would give heads the confidence and the security to make those decisions, and they just don't have that at the moment. So write to your MP, ask them to find out from the DfE what their policies are and how they advise schools, because believe me, I have tried and not found out any of that information. So I think it's been a fascinating debate, very encouraging actually to be in a room of sound people. And I just want to finish with one of the quotes that you used at the beginning of the book. "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether or not I am afraid." Well, I think we have a clear vision, and that's for girls and women to flourish in this country, to build on and protect our hard-won rights. And for many of us, speaking out is frightening. People have to have courage. People in this room have had courage tonight. But we owe it to women and girls to use that voice powerfully. So I want to say thank you again, Helen, for using your voice so powerfully, so articulately and so bravely. Well done.
I want, of course, I want to say thank you to Baroness Emma Nicholson, because without her, none of this would be happening.
Thank you very
Totally fine. Very excited.